Yeah. Cancel. Yeah. What's the goddamn?
Yo, 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 what is up, everybody? Thank you so much for tuning in to stream. Today we have a fantastic special guest here today with us. We have Pastor Darrick Tam, who is a worship pastor at Avenue Community Church, and he's also the founder of the Worship Project. And he's here to share some insight about, about his life and how he came to be a pastor, as well as about his ministry with the Worship Project. So, everyone, could you give him a round of applause? Pastor Darrick Tam, welcome to the South Stream.
Thanks for having me, man. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, we're pretty excited. I see Sarah's pretty very excited right now in chat. So it's very good to have you. I mean, it's been a long time. Like we were talking earlier, and I mean, the last time I saw you, I'm pretty sure it was at a Vision X like prep, I believe.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, we talked earlier, but if you can give the viewers like, well, how's COVID been treating you over the past like couple months?
I don't even know if I could talk about the past couple of months. It's. I think for me it's like a bittersweet thing. I think
Mhm,
the pandemic has allowed me to spend a lot more time with my family. With my wife, both of us being home. It's actually helped our marriage in a lot of ways. Allowed me to just it's almost like you focus more on the simple things, simple life, more intentionality with God, the relationships around you. And so in that sense, it's been really nice. And it's
mhm,
like one of those seasons where you kind of think to yourself, you might not get this kind of a season back. And on the other hand, it's so you think of this as it's so abnormal. Like the lockdowns, the isolation, the lack of community, the no gathering, the social abnormality of everything is uh, that's where I feel like it's taken a strain on myself, my
mhm.
family, a lot of people that I talk to in church, like emotionally, mentally, spiritually, in so many ways. And so yeah, for me, it's a bittersweet thing, but you know, trying to continue to stay positive, and be thankful for like little things, you know.
Awesome. That's really good to hear that you have definitely positives in your life as well. I mean, of course, there's the negatives, but to hear
Mhm.
those positives, I'm sure are is definitely encouraging.
Yeah.
It's encouraging me for me to hear as well, especially within our church, and kind of things have been like trying to get through, the limitations that we have.
Hmm.
Yeah. So for the viewers at
Yeah.
home, I guess in a short summary, well, how would you summarize or explain what the worship project is?
Oh man. Well, do you mind if I start with when I started it? Is that
Yeah,
cool?
absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. So 4 years ago, 2016, it was like one of those years of really big like change in my life when I started kind of I quit my job. I was in part-time ministry at that time, and I felt the Lord calling me and saying, something's about to change in your life, Derek, and you're gonna have to figure out what that was. And so I quit my job in February. It was like a whole year of discerning what to do next. And then right after I did that, all these different worship opportunities came. People were like sending me letters of encouragement in terms of like worship leading stuff, and really felt like a season of affirmation for me. I went on to a retreat from part of the Fluid conference. If anybody's been at Fluid before, they run a retreat every year, usually called Bloom. And I went to the first ever Bloom, and I went there, and it was at Muskoka Woods, and there was like I can't even remember, like maybe 20, 25 young adult leaders from all across like, you know, GTA, and Ontario. And just being in a room with multicultural, uh, such a diverse group of leaders was really, really inspiring. And the Lord spoke to me a lot during that time in my life. And all these, you know, just nudges from God reminding me of how much he's put in me to care about unity in Toronto,
Mm,
and the unity of the church. And so I came back, and I talked to my wife Joy about it. I was like, what do you think about, you know leading worship online and having this like online ministry where worship leaders can like collaborate together, right? And that's what it started at. The worship project started as just like an online thing where I would meet with worship leaders, connect with them, and we would find a way to collaborate on doing music video covers and stuff like that, right? So you see a lot of
Mhm.
that still now. We do a lot of like collaborative things, but then it quickly grew into this ministry within even like the first year where it became less about the online music stuff, but it came about like community building, right? How do we become a ministry that's continuously growing this community of worship leaders and worship musicians in Toronto and the GTA? So we're very focused locally. We're not like, we believe like in hands-on relationships and all that kind of stuff. So, and now, and as we keep growing the community, how do we be a platform that equips resources these worship leaders and musicians as well, right? I grew up in
Mhm.
this. I didn't grow up in the church, but when I started worship leading at a small Korean church in 2005, like I knew nothing. Like there's no resources. I learned everything myself through friends, and any conference I had to go to the States, pay lots of money. I always wondered, like, why isn't there stuff here? Why aren't churches talking together? Why isn't there more collaboration? Why don't we, even within the Asian churches itself, or like, even talk about Korean churches, like there is a lot of like segregation, and we don't
Mhm.
often do a lot of things together, right? And so that was kind of the heart behind it. And now we have like, you know, quite a large community of worship leaders, musicians that know each other, talk to each other, support each other, especially during COVID time. A
Mhm.
lot of people dialoguing, how are you doing this, how are you doing that, and we run like retreats, conferences, community nights, worship nights, all that kind of stuff in our city. So that's what we do, man.
That's awesome. So if there was like a worship leader part of like a small church, would the best way
Mhm.
just be kind of contacting your email on like your website for the worship project and try to get connected that way? Would that be the most efficient way?
Yeah, well, yeah, I think the best way is to just start coming out to some of like the especially like the bi monthly, so every other month we host worship leader community nights, right? And it's just literally
Mhm.
simply a time to connect with other worship leaders, and that's like a great way to kind of just get into like the community and rhythm of just talking to other worship leaders that you probably don't even know, right? And it's
Right.
worth talking to, it's worth getting to know, and people in our team on the worship project, like we're always up for chatting one on one, like doing Zoom calls, or I used to go to coffee with worship leaders all the time that reached out and just wanted to connect with someone, right? And a lot of these worship leaders are in small, medium-sized churches, and they just feel, a lot of them feel like they don't have people who understand them or support them, or they don't know what to do, and so.
Awesome. So then what would be your now short-term goals as well as your long-term goals for the worship project?
Oh man. Um, Short term right now, within the year, is kind of reevaluating, not reevaluating, but looking back at what's happened this year. Like this past year, pandemic, it was a tough year for everybody, right? And we can do a lot of the events we long to do, and there's a lot of adapting and switching. And our whole team said this year, like we wanted to continue to pursue the vision that God's given us right now, and to keep going with the events and the building the community that He wants us to build. And so we're kind of focused on just like the yearly events that we've established in 2019. We want to kind of continue that and keep the ball rolling in right now in 2021. So we're going forward with like our a yearly conference online,
Mhm.
community nights, like all this fall retreat, whatever we can do, we want to continue to do. But long term wise, we have songwriting that's in the works. We want to see the worship community just become larger. At one point we talked about like expansions, having different worship project ministries in different cities, things like that. But those are probably a little more ways down the road.
Oh, that's awesome. I mean, I
Yeah,
if you ever set something up like that, let me know. I'll definitely get my praise team over, make sure
yeah,
they
man.
know about it and reach out. All right. So then from what interests me, well, or what I found interesting was that on Avenue Church's website, specifically, it's you're not just written as a pastor or titled as a pastor, you're titled as a worship pastor. So, what are some things that you do as a worship pastor that makes your role different than a regular pastoral role?
Mhm. Yeah, it's a good question. Um, well, whether I think for the most part in my mind, like somewhat pastoral titles are, um, there's a lot of similarities regardless, because I think, all pastors are called to at least to some similar things to a degree, right? Which is really, you know, shepherding the flock, the congregation, right? And leading people towards Jesus and a more, a closer relationship with him. And in essence, we're all trying to do that, right? But it's more of like, so these titles that are probably more recent than anything else. If you think about the history of pastors and titles and things like that, worship pastors weren't probably existing for that long, right?
Right.
But I love that. I love that it is, because I think churches that do have it, it to me at least, it shows like there's like a value in where they put what worship means for their community. And so for me, like, I'm not just like a worship leader, but I focus on my team, like the creative, the musicians, like the tech guys, and really shepherding them. And a lot of these guys are you know at the front leading our congregations, right? And I firmly believe that we are, teachers are teaching the gospel of Jesus, but we as worship leaders are preparing hearts. We're sharing the gospel in like a different medium, right? In a lot of ways, and these songs are doing those things. And so I think it's a very important role. And so to be able to have the opportunity to kind of build up, empower, equip, shepherd, worship leaders, like I never want to be. I've done my best trying to not to make it like, oh, Darrick, you're going to be the front man guy like all the time, but to like, I was always asking myself like, who's somebody else that's can do the job and can do a great job. How do you empower these people who that God's given like really great talent to, right? And great hearts. And so yeah, like that's part of my focus is like the worship area, the people who are serving alongside me and with me in worship ministry specifically, to really be hands on and working with them and caring about their spiritual walk as well. And then obviously like just like I do a lot of other things specifically at Avenue, like a lot of the communications stuff. I also look after life groups. That's one of the
Mhm.
areas, was added on, which I love doing because I'm a very highly relational person,
Mhm.
right? So yeah, so like we're all in our respective roles, but in essence, like our if you stripped all like the titles and teams down, like we're trying to do the same thing, right?
Right. So then when as you lead, the worship leaders within your church or and around,
Mhm.
what would be like a piece of advice you could give, I mean, for viewers as well, that you often give to worship leaders or like praise team members or stuff like that? If you were to think of one piece of advice that you
Oh,
find is
yeah.
could be helpful.
Don't make it about yourself.
All
there's
right.
there's
Yeah.
just so many, like just so
Yeah.
many things, right? But I say that, and it's something I think worship leaders are going to wrestle with all the time, just because in like our day and age of what church looks like, it's really odd where you know talking about like humility and all that kind of stuff, and yet we're in this front of the stage, and some churches have like light shows and there's a mic in front of you and you're on like an elevated stage and all that kind of stuff, and you're singing these songs, and at some point you know y- those things can get to any person, right? And you have
Mhm.
to really be grounded and to know why you're doing what you're doing, you know and so, as a young worship leader, I was striving to be better, which I think is great. You should always strive to be great and be excellent for the Lord. And then at some point, like for me, the learning tapered off a little bit more, but I had to turn the wheel and say to myself like, why I'm doing what I'm doing and who am I equipping, um, you know.
Mhm.
more than anything else. And so just making it not about yourself. There's so many ways of doing that, but I think a lot of worship leaders need to be reminded that all the time.
Yeah, no, definitely. I've struggled with that. I remember, myself being part of the praise team as like a drummer, and I had to step back. I'm like, I'm doing it just for the music. I don't even know what I'm doing it for anymore. And so, as I grow older, like from comparing myself to high school, I definitely agree with you that that's definitely important advice, and it takes a lot to, take that step back and analyze
Yeah.
yourself. Sarah in
Yeah.
the chat, she's asking, how has Corona affected worship in churches? Do you think the push to online church worship has affected how it's run?
How's what I'm wondering how's what run?
I think just like service in general, as you just like weekly Sunday service or anything like that, has Corona
Mm.
affected that in a significant way?
Oh, um, yeah, I think it has. Like, I've been in touch with so many worship leaders around Toronto and GTA. Like, we have a chat group. I actually have a chat group with like 45 worship leaders from like all across GTA, and we chat here and there, like asking how they're doing, how their services engagement. Like when pandemic started, it was like a gong show, right? It
Mhm.
was just everyone's just trying to do their best to ask the questions like, okay, well, what do we do now? Um, I think coronavirus has definitely shaken up a lot of things. When I think about all the like the service stuff that I'm doing for even for our church, do I think that this is like normal or what gatherings or worship is intended to be in terms of a communally? Probably not. But do I see this as a season, an opportunity? Is there still an invitation that God's kind of bringing everybody into? Yes, I also believe that too. Right?
Mhm.
When people are like fighting for gatherings and going back into their churches, um, you know, I understand why they're doing it. Am I for that? Like, I'm probably leaning towards not as much, just because I think there is in every season we know that the Lord's hands at work, and God is. I see God inviting a lot of us into something different in this pandemic season right now. Right? You know, our worship is not bound to what we do on a Sunday. It's not bound to singing together, as great as it is, and I think we'll get back to that at some point. But I think this is a very introspective period. Um, how can I worship in the privacy of my own home when nobody's watching me? Is it going to be the same? And I'm asking myself those questions too. And yeah, I think from a church perspective, it's shaken up a lot of things. Definitely, um, you know, have people lost engagement throughout this whole season? Yeah, probably. Have we been able to reach new people? That, yes, too. Right.
Yes. Yeah.
And so it's a whole slew of things where suddenly the gospel is being preached like everywhere online all the time, and there's some unbelievable reach that like one of our speakers right now every 4 weeks is from Colombia. Like he's in Colombia and he's preaching at Avenue, and that wouldn't be able to happen, before for us, right? So there's so many new opportunities, but I also understand that this is a season that we're in, and I think there's a lot to learn. There's a lot to learn for the church,
Mhm.
and the question I asked, especially when the pandemic hit, was, wow, maybe a lot of us are more, a lot of just churches are more, um, you know, I don't know if traditional is the right word, but set in our way of doing things than many of us thought we were. And right now it's like I'm asking the question too, even for us, is putting all our eggs in making sure a Sunday service runs, is that the highest priority for us as a church? Are there other priorities, which is like people's health and how they're doing, and other ways of building community, people's mental, emotional, spiritual health, because of the fact that we can't see each other and there's lack of accountability, there's lack of community happening all the time, and people are zoomed out of online stuff, and there's just so many factors, right? And how are we as a church continuing to uh, yeah, foster care, and um, making sure we're present for people in whatever way? Or are we just like, we need to get Sundays done, we need to get Sundays done, we need to get Sundays done? And so yeah, that's stuff I'm still asking all the time.
Nice. Yeah, with pastoral care, I think that's it's been greatly overlooked. I mean, there's a lot of push on like mental health over the past like 2 years, throughout the
Yeah,
world, and
definitely.
it's really, yeah, it's just so important to definitely get, check on people, even if you don't think they need
Hmm.
check up to get checked up on. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
The follow-up
yeah.
question to that, it's very short. Churches do like pre-recorded and live like service online
Mhm.
services. If you had a preference, which one would you prefer?
Um, well, we're doing pre-recorded, so I'll probably just say that I prefer pre-recorded because that's the way we're doing it right now. Yeah, you know what? I think for the most, I think I would lean towards pre-recorded as like a higher percentage. I would lean towards, but I wouldn't say that's for everybody, right? Depending on what resource you have, depending on the time and capacity that people have, like pre-recorded brings a lot of pros because you can bring in um, high quality, um, kind of pre-edited, all that kind of stuff. Yes, you don't get like necessarily the live feel, but you can still make it that way in some ways. But then, especially with technology, doing it pre-recorded, you limit the chance and risk of anything going wrong, right? Especially with like internet and all that kind of stuff, um, and live streaming and all that kind of stuff. But the live feel, you don't get as much creativity in it per se, unless you have all like high end resources and
Mhm.
cameras and backdrops, all that kind of stuff, and all that. But you get like like a little bit more of the communal intimacy factor of like, yeah, that person's there right now talking to me, you know. Um, but from my experience right now and seeing a lot of churches do it, like I think a lot of them have gone pre-recorded in a lot of ways. I think it's all dependent. It's all dependent on where you're at, how big your church is, how resourced it is, and in the end, it's what works for your community.
Mhm. And now I'm gonna go against you, and we do live streaming, so we're the live ones, and you're the
Yeah,
pre-recorded.
yeah, man.
Okay.
Like you guys, people just got to do you, right?
Yeah,
Like
exactly.
we've thought about it too, especially as we get closer to whenever we get closer to getting back into buildings and stuff. Like we probably want to transition some way into some sort of like live format to get, even for myself, get used to that rhythm again,
Mhm.
of what that actually looks like. So
Yeah, I think a lot of people have found that like once you have that set up, you no longer have to worry about it. Like because live streaming is very like daunting for most people because it's this side of technology that you never thought you had to touch for many people. And so I think a lot of churches and just people in general have realized like, oh, live streaming is, oh, this is a really like valuable resource. And if we could start learning
mm,
it, and like you said, it does cost a lot of resources. It helps like as you're doing Sunday service regularly again once COVID passes on, hopefully, right, soon. You
yeah,
now have an option to do it at the same time, right? Live stream your service for
that's right.
those who can't attend. Yeah, so that's
That's right.
awesome.
Yeah.
Uh, I'm gonna ask this question before I lose the chance because I know Melanie is watching, and I know you're good friends with Melanie, and
Melanie,
she's gonna
who?
hate.
No, I'm kidding.
And I'm going to ask this question before I lose the
I'm so
chance.
sorry.
And Melanie asks specifically, why is Melanie the best person you know? You couldn't keep a straight face. You couldn't do it.
I
You couldn't
can't.
do it.
Only Melanie would ask a question like that live,
Right?
you know. But there are many reasons. There are many reasons, you know. She's one of the best people. I will say that, you know. She's awesome. I'm not going to go too far into why she is. Everybody, if you know Melanie, great singer, great person. She visited me a few times during the pandemic and dropped off some goodies and stuff. So you're the best.
All right. Shout outs to you, Melanie. I know you're watching and you're probably going to tune out because of that. Because they broke our promise for not saying I'm not going to ask that question. But Melanie,
Uh,
thanks for tuning in so far. Hopefully you still stay.
oh
All
man.
right. Moving on, moving on. All right. So, I guess leading on to the work that you're doing as a worship pastor, did you always want to be a pastor as you were growing up, or were there other like dreams and aspirations that you had?
Definitely not. Definitely was not on my list. Well, first of all, I didn't grow up Christian, right? So I didn't. I became Christian at 17 years old. After high school, got introduced to church. So I grew up. I did grow up going to an Anglican private school, and my mom was Buddhist majority of my childhood, and so I grew up with a lot of like spirituality, but didn't really know God, Jesus, and anything in the Christian realm. But yeah, at 17, I got introduced to being a community at a Korean church in North York, and everything changed after that, right? And so I love that. That was a big pivotal moment in my life. I was like a spiritual high that I was going on, just doing anything I could in 2005 for those first couple of years, just anything I could learn about God, about who Jesus was, I would learn, Um, but yeah, I got my calling into ministry like soon after that. I think in 2007, probably 6 or 7. Uh, and it was a Vision X, Vision
Mm.
X retreat. And I wasn't leading worship. I wasn't doing anything. I was a youth leader, and I was praying over some youth. And I heard just like whisper to me saying like, "This is what you're going to be doing for the rest of your life. Like things are going to change." I'm like, "Ah, okay, great." And so I kind of fought that a lot, and I talked to my pastors about it. And I had from a high school perspective, it was my first. I wasn't super academic, but my first thing I wanted to do was play college basketball. But because I broke my hand in grade 12, that didn't happen. And then my second thing was to get into a school for animation and graphic design or architecture. But I broke my hand in grade 12, like I just said, so I couldn't get any of my portfolios done. Um, but I went to any university I could get into, and then I actually got into animation school at Sheridan College. Um, in my second year, and I banked everything on that, and then I got this call to ministry, and I left everything. So I left what I wanted to do, which was like become like an animator or computer animation or graphic designer, all that kind of stuff, um, to pursue ministry, right? So that's when that's so. Oh yeah, I didn't think I would be doing this, and let alone music stuff. Like I didn't grow up doing music stuff at all. Like it wasn't until I started going to church and just singing along with my like old friends in the back, in the car on drives, and we're singing like boy band pop songs, and they're like, "Darrick, you could sing." I'm like, "Oh, cool." They're like, "You should join a worship team." I'm like, I don't know what worship teams are, so I don't know what you're talking about.
Right.
And so to think, my sister was always a musical one, and she grew up like a vocal major and all that kind of stuff. And um, I was the last person my family thought would go into anything like this, let alone music, right? So I attribute a lot of it to God's hand, His work, His calling, His gifting. What I do now.
Yeah, like I would like knowing you or when I met you, I would not have known that you were not like connected musically at all since you were like a child. Like okay, for me personally, for the viewers at home that don't know, where I met Darrick was at Vision X when I was part of the youth group at my church. And like I
Mm.
knew him as one of the leaders for the praise team there, Basic. And like I knew you as like, wow, you're an amazing lead, like like worship leader, singer, like. So to hear you say you weren't even connecting musically till like pretty much after high school, that's news to me. That's actually crazy.
Mm. Yeah, a lot of people
So
wouldn't know that, and
yeah.
and yeah, it's crazy. It's crazy for me to even to think that too. So
Yeah, God works in amazing ways. Praise to God.
yeah.
Then like so linking it to Vision X, then like as for those that viewers at home, Vision X is a nonprofit organization here in Toronto that runs interchurch retreats. And like I said, I met Pastor Darrick as when he was a worship leader for Basic there, leading praise for the youth there. Um, Specifically, one question that's not related to any of the things that I wanted to ask you. I know Bethel gave you a hard time. I know for a fact, you cannot deny it, that Bethel Church, members of Bethel Church gave you a significantly hard time during those years when you were a basic praise leader. Is there anyone that
My
comes to
first few, my
mind?
first few years, my first few years at Vision X, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
You
Is
want
there
me to
anyone that
literally
comes
say
to
their
mind?
names? Do you want me to say their names?
That's up to you. If you want to do that, or if you want to just share, like, what are your thoughts about those, like, those situations that you kind of had to go through? Do you like it's?
I'll, 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 I'll call one of them out because at least I know we're friends and stuff. You know,
Right.
Ann Lim. Yep, Ann Lim. She's funny. She was a funny one back then. And I think one of her friends, Ruth. I'm not really connected with Ruth now anymore. But yeah, those a lot of people gave me a hard time in my first year of Vision X, and like I was what, like I think I was what, 19 years old maybe, right? Like I was young, like a young kid, and this is one of my first, like, larger retreats, and I see Vision X. Vision X was very formative for my worship leading,
Mm,
right? Before that, like I was just leading in my home church, like super small, and the opportunity of Vision X just and basic together gave me, yeah, really, what's how do I say this? It helped me to nurture my leadership, grow my leadership, and put a lot more care and effort into my own spiritual walk and all that, right? To me, it was just like, oh, I'm leading in my home church to my friends, but to see the responsibility of like hundreds and hundreds of youth, and this younger generation, it was a big deal for me, right? And it still is, and that's why I'm such a, having my calling at Vision X and my formative worship leading years at Vision X, and it's a reason why, like, even today I'm still a part of it. Like
mhm.
I'm still a part of it, looking after the worship teams that go and all that kind of stuff. Like it's just a big part of my life that I love so much. But yeah, that first year was crazy. I know one of the questions you were going to ask me was what was some of your favorite moments of
Yeah,
Vision
yeah,
X. Like
yeah.
I think my first 2 years was one of the highlights, not because of the stuff that that we're talking about, like the youth that gave me a hard time, or I think, like, for the viewers who were watching, like there were like Facebook groups of me
Oh my
and different
gosh,
things
yes,
like
I
that. It
remember
was
finding
Yeah,
that. That was,
it
I was
was
like,
it
well, you
was
guys are
bad.
crazy.
And there's like weird
Oh,
pictures, like, through other people's heads, and there's like just like, picture of my head like from like miles away. I'm like, what is happening right now? And luckily, like, the pastors, my mentors, the directors of Vision X, they called me after the retreat just to make sure, like, hey, like, you're good, and try to make sure, like, they squished my head and popped my ego right
right.
away. Ironically, the topic and theme of Vision X was idolatry that year. It was Canadian idols, and I
The
was like, wow,
most,
you guys did
oh
not
my gosh, the
not
most
listen to one
ironic
anything.
situation.
I know. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
It was fun
I
times, fun
definitely
times.
remember those Facebook groups. My goodness.
Somebody
Oh
stole my
wow.
ID. I mean, somebody had my driver's
Really?
license.
Oh my
Yeah, they like
goodness.
called it, like,
Yeah.
whoever has Darrick's driver's license, like, you gotta give it back to.
Oh my gosh. Well,
Oh man, so bad.
thankfully, you're not in the spotlight anymore, and that has passed. So, I mean,
Yeah,
you've grown stronger from it, I'm sure.
yeah, definitely. Well, thankful for, like, the people in my life that spoke wisdom to me during those young years.
hmm All right. Then from there, kind of going back to the worship project, like I've personally listened and watched
Cool.
like your song covers that you work with other musicians and worship leaders, and videos like that. And the one that stood out for me the most was where you share your experiences with burnout. Um, and I kind of wanted to ask questions on like kind of a side that you didn't touch as detailed within your video, which
Yeah.
was like how long did it take for that burnout to build until others began noticing that you said in the video like you weren't being yourself.
Yeah. Well, for those of you who haven't watched that video, I think it was in 2000 and, yeah, 13 or something like that, around then. So around 7 years ago, 7, 8 years ago. It was really my first experience with, like, true burnout. And weirdly to say, it was when a year after I got married, right? Um, and it wasn't just me. Like it was one of those things that me and my wife were just going through a very, very hard time. Like, um, after Joy and I got married, you know, there was just so much change, right, happening. It was very hard for Joy to deal with, and so it was kind of like she was like grieving a lot of loss of what her life looked like before, and so we had to work through that a lot. Just me being there for Joy, and it was only our first year and two marriage, but in the end, that kind of burned me out too. We ended up kind of projecting our negativity upon each other, and so a lot of the burnout had to do with like just family life and how to cope with the first little bit of marriage that wasn't what we expected at all, right? And so everybody expects you to get married and it's like super dandy. For us, it was not like that, right? The first 2 years was really, really difficult, but we got through it. And but again, it was 2013, I think, like September, or throughout the summer of 2013. Like it was pretty gradual. I wouldn't say like, I don't know. I honestly, I don't even know when people noticed exactly or how long it took for people to notice, because it was gradual. And you're so good usually at just masking it up. You just keep going, right? But slowly my demeanor was changing. I remember I lost so much motivation. I would go into our church office and the other pastors and would see me, and they would kind of notice that I just didn't want to be there. I kind of had the look on my face of like when is this going to end? And that's just not like, I'm usually pretty like positive, pretty kind of upbeat, extroverted guy. And so when I'm not like that, something is pretty much up, right? And my sister was one of those people. My sister was one of the people who saw it. And she's just like, when she saw me like that during one of the meetings, she was on staff with me during that time. She called me up and she's like, Darrick, I need to tell you something. And I was like, okay, what do you want? Like legit. And she's like, 6 months ago, I had a dream, and you were like in my dream, and you were stoic, and you were almost. It was as if you were almost like a zombie. You were there. You weren't alive. You were pale. You weren't moving. I was trying to pull you, and you just wouldn't do anything. And there's some other stuff happened in that dream where like she was trying to like get me to move or whatever. But in the end, she was trying to say the look that you had yesterday at our meeting that's the same look that I saw in my dream, right? So it was almost like my sister sometimes has these like prophetic dreams, and she makes it a point to make sure she like whenever she gets that revelation, whatever, she shares it, especially with me and people close to her. So she was one of the people who try to like just make me aware of what was happening. It's like, you need some time. And I talked to my lead pastor at the time about it, and he was just like, him and the leadership was just like, I was really grateful. Like nobody was saying like just get over it. Like nobody was saying like just giving whatever advice. They were really, really. I was really grateful for their support and knowing, Darrick, whatever you need right now, take some time to yourself. Like get some spiritual direction, both you and Joy, get some counseling together, or work through this time, like focus on yourselves. Because and that was one of those areas where you realize, you always know it in your head, like if you're not healthy, how are you going to lead in a healthy way? And I really learned that during that season. Like I need to make sure I'm in a healthy place, and sometimes you're going to hit rocks and you're going to hit bottoms, and you need some time to get out of it. And you need to have you need to have spaces in your life that are gonna help you kind of get back up. And so I made it a point. I always make sure I have close mentors around, family that can speak into my life, and you just always being open to it, you know, so that, because it's inevitable. Sometimes you're just gonna hit those seasons, right?
Then would you say, like, let's say your sister did not bring up her dream that related to you, do you think that your burnout would have like went on much longer, significantly longer, if she never brought that up to you?
Maybe, maybe, right? Like she was one of the people that, yeah, like called me out on it. Not rebuking. She wasn't rebuking, but she was just like, "Hey, you're not okay. You have to acknowledge that."
Right.
Right? Maybe it would have went longer, um, and maybe at some point I would have hit a wall and had to just let it out in a different way.
Hmm.
But yeah, like either way, I think the God was speaking through her to me in a very clear
Right.
way. Right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
no, that definitely sounds super clear. And so then what is some advice that you can give others that might be in similar positions about burnout and how to deal with it?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of kind of little things. I kind of mentioned a little bit of it.
Mhm.
Like you need like good spiritual friends and family around you, right? That's one of the things I appreciate the most. And it's not even related to burnout per se, just your life and your walk. You need people who aren't just there for the sake of being there, but they're there, uh, willing to say the hard things to you, willing to help be the part of picking you back up, speaking truth in your life, wisdom in your life. Um, yeah, and not just in any way, but especially from like a spiritual standpoint too, right? And guiding you through that. Um, I think also being able to be aware of what kind of, being aware of your own personality. So over these last however many years, like Joy and I, and even myself, like learning our own personalities, learning what unhealthy tendencies I have. Like I've learned over here, I'm a very big like I have an achiever personality mixed with like um, I forgot what this, on Enneagram, it's like 3-wing 2, right? And just knowing who you are, so you know what your tendencies are, what your habits are, what unhealthy things you might go into, or and all that kind of stuff. So then you're able to create like healthier rhythms and boundaries in your life that actually like limits you from hitting that deep of a wall. You know what I mean? So yeah, so I think those two things, I'm sure there's more, but those are things that come to mind a lot too. Is like, how are you going to set healthy rhythms and boundaries in your life? And also, who are the people in your life you know, that's going to continue walking with you and journeying with you through all of it, right? Because you're not going to do it alone. Right? It's just not going to happen.
Mhm. All right. With the next question, I'm interested in this as well. Because my pastor has been kind of toying with the idea of creating an original song with new members of the worship team that we're kind of recruiting within our church, kind of like as an activity and an exercise to kind of get to know each other better and
Mhm.
work on something together as an art. So, for me, this question is: have you created an original song, and if so, could you give some insight of how you like create, like the processing creating an original song?
I have, but it was a long time ago,
Mm.
right? I probably haven't spent time intentionally writing for probably like 10 years, I would say. And back then, I did write a handful. I will not show it to you. Man,
Well, for the stream, for the
just
stream. No,
even
I'm
knowing,
kidding.
no, man, just knowing 10 years ago, and I already know. Just thinking back of what it was, man, it's probably so bad, right? But I have been part of a lot of songwriting processes. Um, Even if it's just not me by myself, I've done a lot of like songwriting circles and songwriting groups. And even in the worship project now, like one thing that we felt like we were being led towards um, was actually writing originals from the worship project, right? Um, Somebody to show just
Show
one.
just one.
No, your ears will bleed.
Sorry,
Yeah.
Janie. He's saying no.
um, yeah, I think, and I've been lucky enough to pick the brains of a lot of like like for instance, like through the worship project, we've had people guests like Leslie Jordan from like All Sons and Daughters, right? To pick a brain about songwriting and getting to know Andy Rozier from Vertical, who writes, just shared with me like his song process for Vertical and all that kind of stuff. Almost every person that's talked to me about songwriting has always mentioned that it's always about the journey, more than the end product, right?
Hmm.
The journey of creating something together, and it's not with the intent of creating something that's going to be out there, right? It's for the sake of doing something within your group, letting that expression come out, and it's between you and God. Um, if somehow that song is meant for, you know, the greater church and for others to hear and sing, that's great, right? But I think the process and journey of songwriting is really about listening and being able to share some of that, what you are hearing, what you are feeling, um, and what you're getting from God onto words and paper and melody and arrangement and all that kind of stuff,
Mhm.
right? Um, so I think that was one of the key things I've always taken away, and also being really open to working with other people because all of us have very very different giftings even when it comes to songwriting. Right? I've known myself that I'm not really a lyricist at all.
Mm.
I'm way more of like I love arrangements and melodies more than lyrics. Like being able to do that in a way better uh, way than other people that I've met who are so strong in lyrics, right? And so just the more you work in a group setting, the more you kind of know yourself, how you work in songwriting dynamics, and be able to bounce things off each other, and being humble enough to not even if you were to put something on paper, like being able to be humble enough to be like, yeah, like yes, I put this on paper, but this is not just my own, and being able to accept critique or input from other people to make it more whole, and be able to have that perspective. Sometimes it's hard. It's hard to do that, right?
Mhm.
Someone's like, you write something, you feel like it's your baby. It's hard to let go, you
Right.
know. And so I think it does take a lot of intentional time, to sit there and to be able to listen and hear what God is saying, to let Scripture speak, and to put pen to paper, to write things down, and yeah. But even a lot of these guys who are like pretty, these professional songwriters, they're all like, in a year we can have one album come out. Do you know how many songs were in the bank? Like probably like 150 to 200 songs
Wow.
were in the bank. And some of them we love those songs, but they're just not meant to be out there, and they're going to stay within us, or
Mm.
maybe stay within our church, or stay within the group, and that's just what it is, right? And they love it, and they just love it for the process of that journey of songwriting together. And that's what the worship project guys are going into now. Like this year, we're gonna be intentionally just getting together with a small team and writing for like at least once a month, and it's for the sake of being together, growing together, and hearing what God has to say together. And if something comes up, great. If not, fine. you know
Yeah. Yeah, I
yeah,
mean, if something does come out, I look forward to listening to it because Janie definitely wants to
me
hear one,
too.
and and I definitely look. My biggest fear is like when we go into songwriting, like I fear that I'm gonna have so much trouble. Like with the lyricism and stuff. I definitely like agree. Like with hearing God's word and sitting on it, discernment, all that kind of stuff is not what I fear. It's more so how do I steer away from the typical Christian chords of G, C, D, and E minor? Like that freaks me out because it's so natural to like steer towards it, you know. And that's my biggest fear. I don't
Yeah,
know. Like you can. It's weird thinking of experimenting with different chord progressions, but that's just me. That's just me.
yeah, I know, but I think that's again, it goes back to like the purpose of what you're trying to do, right? Um, and the more like I think it's always helpful to listen to other music in general, um, and you know, I think your tendency is probably going to be to go to what you know and what you hear, you know. But yeah, the more you're exposed to, the more you're listening to, and it helps just expand your ear to want to hear something else than the typical like the four chord progression changes, you know, and when to put like the fifth and the sixth and and all that kind of stuff. So, but you have to start somewhere. That's it. You just got to start. You can't be afraid to start, right? And the more you do it, and the more you try, like you're only going to get better. So
All right, that's great. That's awesome advice. Then with like you were mentioning with those songwriters that you're working with, from like All Sons and Daughters and Vertical Worship as well. What are your thoughts about general contemporary Christian music then?
yeah, I don't know. Sometimes it's a love hate thing. I do love contemporary worship music. It's not like I don't, because I think um, I think some of it is simple enough for like people to learn in a lot of ways. Like you talk about like progression things like that, and there's a level of simplicity um, where somebody who's not as proficiently skilled as some of these like professional musicians can still lead and pull it off in some sort of ways. I think maybe sometimes I think maybe less now because if you look at contemporary Christian worship now, it's like it's the proficiency and level of musicianship is getting higher and higher. Even within the last like 5 to 7 years, there's it's not just a simple like again like it's not always just a four chord changes like the singers the melodic arrangements of even like for singers it's a lot different than what it was 10, 15 years ago, right?
Yes.
Electric guitarists, drummers, it's not just like straight beats and like one liners. Like there's a lot of things that you're thinking about if you wanted to play and do like an exact replica cover of one of these songs.
Mhm.
um, and so anyway, um, I think what I sometimes not like about contemporary worship music is how sometimes like, this is just my personal opinion, but it's like
Mhm.
sometimes how similar it all sounds in it's a lot of ways,
Oh,
right? And what's one of the things I kind of don't like too is just how celebratized everything is, if that makes sense, you know?
as in
Um,
like it's kind of uh, a good way to put it would be like how it's just kind of like blown up out of proportion for
a little
how
bit,
Christians
a
listen to
little
it.
bit, yeah. In one way, you could look at it similar to like online streaming now, how like it's all getting out to just so many people, and these like really popular Christian worship artists are being heard from a lot of places. But um, yeah, sometimes you just sometimes you can't help but think like is there this celebrity culture that's very unhealthy,
Mm,
right? Um, whether it's just like they're okay, well, there's like five big you know Christian worship artist names, and those are the songs we're going to pick, and they're going to write songs, and we're going to do them, right? And I love them,
right.
and I'm going to go to their concerts. They're the only people we're listening to. Um, yeah, and when it's almost like it's like a monopolized a little bit, right?
Mm,
It's hard not to think that sometimes, um, but it's not like I don't like the music. Like I do. I just sometimes like, maybe there's more. Maybe there is like being intentional. How well you as a worship leader or um, even Christian is going to diversify your ear to other artists or independent artists or whatnot. And in the end, like I think as a worship leader, sometimes I look at what's going to be best for my congregation. You know what I mean? You can listen to all these music and and some songs can be great or whatever. It's like, well, what's going to be great to lead and for my congregation to be engaged and draw closer to Jesus. And if the song it can do that, like by all means, that's great.
mhm.
And I again, I'm not here like to bash anything because I think that like I know some of those like I don't know a lot of like the Hillsong guys or whatever, but like some of these guys like they're doing what they professionally are trained to do, you know and I appreciate that. I love that. Like that is what they've been trained in, gifted in, musicianship, songwriting. That is what they do for a living, you know but they're doing it for the Lord, and they're doing it to resource the church, and I love that, right? um I just think like easily like the culture of church in general, if you're just only looking at like a certain resource and a certain source, it could be unhealthy, right? um yeah, I don't think that even answers your question, but there's so much to say with contemporary Christian music and worship. you know,
Yeah, I mean, we've been actually on the side of kind of like you were saying, like where you were mentioning like celebratized kind of and put on a pedestal where like, of course, having the name Bethel, the Korean Bethel Church, when they Google us, we get
yeah,
like people assume we're the other big Bethel church and had people, come accidentally to our church, but then like I think like up to there it's fine. Like you found our church, but then it's like they don't even consider like what our church is. because they're so fixated on
Mm,
the giant Bethel. So we've definitely had a taste of that. And so it kind of made me think about like, okay, what can we do personally as a church that can make us more inviting, maybe? But it wasn't like negative in the sense like, oh, this is
yeah,
terrible. But yeah, I definitely have seen that
yeah,
side. Then kind of
yeah,
linking on to
yeah.
that with your opinion on contemporary Christian music, like Sarah's mentioning about comparing like old hymns versus modern worship, and so she's saying how
Mhm.
old hymns are much more theological and meaningful, while modern worship could be considered simple and repetitive. And she mentions how some atheists who might listen to today's worship music might think it almost sounds like brainwashing because you might be repeating one line multiple times over and over again. So, what do you think about that comparison with modern worship versus old hymns?
Yeah, I think there's room for both. Yeah, I love hymns and I love repetition. Right? I think it draws you to different places, in my opinion. Right? For someone who's done like studying theology, like it hits a different part of you. Right? It's almost like spirit and truth. You know what I mean? Like there are songs that really bring out and continue to emphasize like the character of God so deeply and so poetically, and a lot of these hymns do that. And then there's some of the modern worship songs like I'm not saying I love all of them. There's some hymns I don't like too, and there's a lot of modern worship songs I don't prefer either. But sometimes the repetition is also what's needed because it digs at the spirit, it digs at the soul of what we are sometimes want to say but can't like I think a part of our worship is it's a spectrum of kind of head and heart, if you know what that means. It's not just like one sided, but it's like about it's about our entire being of how we respond to God, right? And sometimes I think about the Psalms. How much repetitions are there in the Psalms? When David's yearning, he's repeating certain lines over again. And if you look at how much even the different psalms that you can read, and how similar lines are in every single one when he's yearning for God, when he's in trouble, how many times he talks about his enemies, how many times he talks about his enemies and then turns around and says like, God, you're with me. When I stepped into the sanctuary of the Lord, like I'm reminded, I almost lost my foothold. There's so much of that, right? I think that's the very emotion of David, and a lot of these psalmists um, are wrapped up, and it's both. It's I think it has to be a mix of both theological and um, you know what the heart is wanting to long for. Some songs lean towards one, and some songs lean towards the other. I think some of the greatest songs that we love are probably both that have both intertwined in it,
Mhm.
right? You know, I love like some of my favorite hymns are like they're not as old, but even like in Christ alone, it is well, um, come thou fount, like even as the deer. I love as the deer. I sang that growing up
Mm.
in chapel before I was even Christian, but lyrically, how much imagery there is. And all that kind of stuff. Like the lyrics are just so beautiful, but it's so theologically. And even some of these hymns, like I've studied some of these hymns, and not every hymn is theologically sound. Like there's still
Mm.
like there's a lot of winged bases, and of where these songs are coming from, and that's going to be the same throughout, right? But just I think sometimes the songs that are written these days in modern like they're a lot more. Sometimes we feel like they're lyrically a little simpler, right,
Mhm.
than they
Yeah.
used to be, which is probably true. But then you get the little nuggets here and there. You get some of the contemporary worship songs, some of them these days that are very well rounded and very poetic, very great, and yeah, I think yeah, I prefer. I love both. I love
Mhm.
both, and it kind of hits different depending on what your response is and what the song is. So
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. Like enjoying both. Like there's something about hymns, old hymns, and sometimes we get the modern rearrangements of the hymns and stuff, and kind of have that mix. Is it really hits home? I don't know how else to explain it myself. I don't know. It really sits with you in your heart, and that's what I also enjoy about certain hymns. So
Yeah,
that's my thought on it as
yeah,
well. Which brings us to our kind of final question that I had prepared for you. Now that we've broken the ice and you've shared a lot about yourself, here's the big one. As a worship
sure.
leader, and I'm sure you've heard this you've been asked this question before, and it's specifically about the controversy around the song "Reckless Love." For those that may not know, "Reckless Love" was a Christian song that was released, and there was a lot of controversy behind the meaning behind of the song, and saying, the definition of reckless, and how debate on whether or not God's love can be defined as reckless or considered reckless. So what are your thoughts and opinions about the song, and the
Mhm.
controversy around it?
Yeah, like I'll say this. I understand why there's controversy around it. I really do, and stuff like this it's been around forever. It's not just because of this song. It's just because of the nature of where people will stand, um, theologically, church culturally, and all that kind of stuff. Whether it was a song or a sermon or whatever, like the nature of it is that it exists, right? Um, I'm one of those people who, like, I try not always leaning towards a side. Um, but it's a reason why I started the worship project. I was part of Basic, and all that's about unity, right? And even the denomination that our church is a part of, the Evangelical Covenant Church, like, it's so much of it is about, um, amidst our differences, and some of us will even have some theological differences. How do we still stand together? How do we still, um, do kingdom work together, even amidst some of our differences? You know, and to say, like, that's fine. And some people believe in infant baptism, some people don't, right? And we have mix of those in our denomination. Or, um, like, just that's just one example, right? But, um, obviously, but there's some, as long as for me, like, when I'm sitting in a room with worship leaders all across our city, I know that some of these people have probably a big issue with reckless love. Some people don't,
Hmm.
right? And I say there, like, this is not for a place of theological debate, but this is a place where we look at why we're here together. And I really firmly believe too, like, we can have our own theological stances, but in the end, the best theologian still doesn't have it perfectly right. If that makes sense, right?
Yeah.
Like, I forgot who said it once. Like, the best of us theologians are probably only at most 60-70% correct. And
Mhm.
that's just crazy. Because this is what we've kind of brought out, in our human limitation to the table. And, so anyway, with that being said, I think, hold on a second. My earbuds are gonna die, so I'm gonna
Yeah, no
disconnect my
problem.
earbuds right now.
All right, are we good? Hello, hello, can you hear me? We're just gonna have that fixed here real quick. No, I cannot hear you. It's gonna be a no on my front. So as Pastor Derek gets his audio fixed and readjusted, do you guys have any other questions that you'd like to ask?
Hello, can you hear me?
Hello, yes, we can hear you.
Oh, great.
Okay, perfect.
Anyway, I was saying, um, yeah, with that song, specifically, I've wrestled with it a lot personally, right?
Hmm.
Um, and at least for myself, I've actually done it at my church a couple of times, right? But when I did it, I was really adamant on
on teaching that song and why, where it comes from, and not just singing it itself, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I know everyone's gonna have a different view on that, or whatnot. And I talked to even our pastors about it and where we stand, and like, what do you guys think about this song? Because in the end, honestly, like when I listen to that song, it's actually really beautifully written, right?
Mm.
There's so many things about that song that are so beautifully written, and like the words, and like the one of the things was like, well, that debate of whether the love of God is reckless. Like, yeah, it can go back and forth, because there's a negative connotation to the word reckless,
Mm-hmm.
and but then we all kind of wrestled with it, our whole pastoral team, and like, well, I look at Luke 15, and we look at the sitting, Jesus sitting at the table with sinners, and the consequences of what that means, for things like the song kind of alludes to, about the sheep, and you would go and risk the lives of all other 99 sheep to save that one sheep.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, is reckless exactly the right word? Maybe not. Like, but we're also limited in vocabulary compared to even
Right.
what original texts would use, right? Is it a very countercultural type of love? Is it a very extreme, unconditional, we'll do whatever it takes, I don't care if I die, and I'm going to look stupid, doesn't matter what the consequences are, I'm going to go after it, right?
Mm-hmm.
So do I think, when I think of the term reckless, and some of the definitions are like, um, uh, you know doing something without thought of consequence or whatever. um, I kind of, I don't think of it as his love of God, like the love of God being reckless, is that he never even thought of the consequences. Is that he knows what the consequences is, but that doesn't even matter. You
Mm-hmm.
know, and so in that kind of a sense, I can see why, like, the term reckless could be understood, but again, it comes with a lot of negative connotations, right? Naturally, um, but I think a lot of what Jesus did in those times came with a lot of negative attention. That was just the nature of how he did things, because um, what the Pharisees were doing was just not at heart what was supposed to be done, right? And in the end, I think it's really up to where each church is how they're gonna wrestle with it and be on that page. And if some people aren't comfortable with it, then don't sing it, right? And if you have the space and availability to wrestle with it and to get to a point of like, oh, this is a beautiful song, and you can teach it, then I think, why not, right? If you can teach it, and still, yeah, kind of I don't want to use the word just theological, but teach it to the congregation in a way that kind of wraps that word around better than just leaving it as is, right? Because leaving it as is, saying like God's love is reckless to anybody, and maybe it might not make sense to them, but be able to teach your congregation. I think that's what our job is as worship leaders, right? In that sense, is how are we teaching our congregation about Jesus, about his love, about worship, what worship means, and all that kind of stuff. We're not just singing songs, right?
Mm-hmm.
We're in a very interesting way teachers too, right? Um, and so, yeah, that was how I went about it. And I'm not always I'm personally not like always attached to linguistics all the time, right? Sometimes I'm like, yeah, a word here and there, like it's never going to be perfect. Um, but I felt like the song was really, really well written, personally, right? And I found a way to be able to feel at peace about singing and leading this song to my congregation, and in a way that we felt would do it justice and still be gospel centered, right? And we felt that the only way to do that was to make sure we teach it. You know,
Yeah, and I think you definitely taught the viewers at home today another aspect of it. That was actually beautifully said. I couldn't have said it better myself. That was awesome. That's great. Um,
Thank the Lord.
no, it was really no, it was beautifully said. I
Oh,
think you touched up on the points. Yeah, you touched up on the points, and I think you like the way you shared, especially like with using scripture as an example. Like that was definitely a great way to understand like how possibly we can use the English word reckless to define parts of God's love for us. So Tahoe 339, thank you for the follow as well, has a question for you. Then going away from contemporary Christian music, what do you think about Christian metal?
I don't have enough experience with Christian metal. To be honest. I have connections to people who do Christian metal. Um, yeah, I think there's a church called like Church Underground, and they were like a young adults like Friday once a month. They meet at this place and they do Christian metal. I don't know. I haven't reflected enough to give a honestly like a proper answer. Like that's
Mhm.
the truth, right? Like I've never been into to metal music, like really growing up, and so you know, I don't. Yeah, I don't really have an opinion on it. That's the best thing I can say.
Could you
Oh
imagine
man,
like a church just singing like they sing a couple contemporary Christian songs and then bam, one song of like Christian metal in the
yeah.
middle like a set?
I feel my first ever reaction, even when I heard that it exists, like I wasn't surprised that it exists, um, but I did feel it was a little odd, like just thinking about doing like like the screamo and the type of music it is, but you're like I don't even know what you're saying, but supposedly the lyrics is Jesus is Lord, and thank you for all you've done, but you're screaming it in like a crazy voice. Like I don't know. I think I have to experience it or hear more of it. And I don't know.
Yeah, I've only heard it like once myself. I've definitely heard like Christian hip hop and Christian rap. Like those are awesome. I
Yeah.
actually really enjoy those. But Christian metal is definitely not something I dabble in myself. So yeah,
And
I'm
maybe,
I'm
maybe
I'm in the mystery.
I mean, for the metal fans, maybe there's a thing to it, right? For
Hmm.
like the metal fans and that love heavy metal, and you're suddenly there's a gateway to hearing different lyrics, which you can't really understand to begin with. So I don't know.
Yeah, yeah. That's so. Sorry, Tahoe 339. We're us both. We're not sure. Too much. We'll maybe no promises. Maybe we'll dabble in it more. We'll see in the future. Chris Kyungsia asks, "Hey Derek, how is fatherhood treating you?"
Oh man, yeah, I think I see another fatherhood question below too. But I love fatherhood. I love fatherhood. That's probably like one of my greatest joys in my life. Yeah, I think fatherhood's taught me a lot about. It's very cliche because I heard this a lot too. It's like, oh, like until you have kids, like it opens your heart and your mind up to even spiritually to so much, and you don't really know until it happens, and really understanding like the father's love for you. Like I think about my two kids. Like I have a kid who's 4, I have a kid who's 2. Um, like I would go to the ends of the earth for them. Like I would do whatever it takes. I would lay down my life for those kids. You know, um, and to yeah, to finally kind of like have that, and it's like a reality in my life. You start kind of processing that in terms of like the love of God that the love that God has for us as well. It's very strange, and then at the same time, like you created these beings, like God created these beings through you, and it's like this beautiful miracle. And so I don't know, I love my kids. I'm very biased. I think they're like the cutest things, you know. But that's just me. Yeah, I think it's given me a whole kind of new, different worldview. And as much like they're definitely a big priority in my life, but it's like a new thing of like my family is now also like in a very interesting way, like a ministry and a mission field, and how I'm going to raise my kids. How am I going to continue to share and exemplify Christ in my life to my kids, right? And knowing how to balance that. It's a very difficult thing. It's hard. It's very, very hard, fatherhood and parenthood, but very rewarding. So
Yeah, and so the follow-up question to that was, now like you said, fatherhood is difficult, but of course, like amazing, and the experiences from it is just overjoying. but do you have any advice on balancing that, like everything in life with fatherhood and all that kind of stuff, and kind of like we mentioned earlier about burnout and not heading towards that burnout point?
Yeah. Oh, are a lot of the viewers from Korean churches?
The
Yeah.
most likely, because I mean the people that we know are mostly within the Korean churches,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
there may be viewers not as well.
Okay. Well, in general, I think pastoral ministry in itself can inevitably cause burnout in itself, because you are in the vocation of caring for other people in a lot of ways, right? And you are, yeah, you're shepherding and you're looking after a flock, right? Any job that's like that, whether you're a doctor or you know, police officers or nurses or whatever, caregivers of any sort, it gets daunting, because burnout, you know, my study of burnout, um, it happens most in relational settings, right? When you're carrying the burden of people's of relationships and other people's, you know, yeah, burdens that you're starting to take on as your own, if you're not really aware of it. So that happens to a lot of pastors, right? And so that kind of term of, you know, lead out of like a healthy place, that's really on us, right? What, like I talked about it before, like what boundaries are you going to set for yourself? Because, you know, in my experience, you know, serving and working at a Korean church too, and you know, and I'm sure this happens in a lot of other churches too. It's and depending on your personality, you can easily just keep going, right? And sometimes in some churches, people put so many things and expectations on you that might not even be fair, right? Um, I think you need to have proper boundaries for yourself, like, and know your capacity, you know. And I've tried to learn how to do that. Like, what is my capacity with my family, and to really reprioritize. Like, my identity is not in my vocation as a pastor, right? This is a calling that God's given me, and I love it. And I love every bit of it. You know, because you know, He's given me this opportunity, but my identity is a child of God, and even in my family, like, I'll put my family in super high priority. And I really believe now more than ever, like, you know, my church life is very, very important, but who I come home to after is my family, is my wife and my kids. Like, if I spent all my time, and I think I know a lot of pastors do this too, like, they invest so much and they sacrifice their family and pour into church. And, you know, I don't know, like, I don't know how healthy that is a lot of the time, right? I'm learning more and more that, you know, your home life as a ministry in itself, like, you and your spouse need to be on the same page, to make your kids a very high priority in ministry, and to make sure you are there as a father, and there as a husband and a wife, and to be present, right? And that is something that we're called to do as well. And so, again, not to put all your eggs in your identity wrapped around what you do. And a lot of people who I think a lot of people who go into ministry and have the personality, especially like that, have similar personalities as I do. I'm a doer, right?
Mm-hmm.
I'm an achiever, and so it's almost like you wrap so much of who you are in the success of your church, because that impacts you so much. You wrap so much of your identity in the fact that you care for people, and it feels good doing it. But yeah, I think you have to make sure that you always reassess year after year, like, what your priorities are, what your boundaries are, and to know that, what you know, you're a broken person. At some point, like, you may not be at that church forever, you know. Things are going to happen, right? But your family's going to be here. Your family's going to be here. God's going to be here, right? And so, you know, when I think about eternity with God, the next closest thing we have on earth that's going to be like present beside you through life is your family, right? Like my wife and my kids, especially my wife, because my kids are going to grow up and they're going to do their thing. They're going to start their own families. But me and my wife are going to be in this, like, you know, marriage together forever. And so how is that going to be like, how am I nurturing that, as a primary thing in my life that bleeds into the ministry, right?
Awesome.
So
I think
I think all those things kind of have helped me in terms of just making sure you prioritize well, checking in with yourself, checking in with your mentors, checking in with your wife and spouse, and making sure you're doing ministry in a healthy way, so that you don't get to that place where you feel the burdens of everything, of church ministry, of people, all on your shoulder, all by yourself. So
thank you very much for that detailed answer. I'm sure world's chillest kid is going to very appreciate that very much. Tahoe339 had a follow-up saying that he found a band, he or she found a band that is great, and they use Luke 22:17-19 in Latin as lyrics. So saying that the lyrics are deeply related to Christianity. They kind of look at it like tongues and makes a joyful noise to the Lord. So hey, Tahoe, I know you mentioned that you're like, if you we want to know about any bands, why don't you link that band, like type the band in chat, so that we can have a look, at least the one you're mentioning, so that we can give a look see afterwards on after stream or something like that. So that'd be awesome. So just type the band in chat and we'll take a look. But that's it. Questions from me. Viewers, any final questions that you have for Pastor Darrick before we end our interview today?
This was fun, man.
No, thank you so much for joining. Like, this is awesome. Like, I was like, oh man, because we always think like, oh, who could we have as our next guest? And I was like, I personally myself like love enjoying music and doing praise. Like, I personally thought that you would be an amazing guest, especially because I do admire what you've done for the Christian community here in the GTA, and I wanted to share your knowledge and your wisdom to everyone. So thank you.
Awesome,
thank
man.
you very much.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So Tahoe posted the band Diamonds to Dust, and the song is Corpus Christ. All right.
I'll take a listen.
So there we go. He'll take a listen to it, Tahoe. He'll let you know. But otherwise, I think that's it for questions. Thank you so much. Oh, actually, no, there's one more. There's one more question. Sorry, right when I was about to end it. All right, Chris Lee asking, how did you end up singing the national anthem for the Raptors? That's true. I was like, whoa, I know that guy. I know that guy. How did you end up in that situation?
Okay. So I was very affiliated with this organization called CCYAA, which is a Canadian Chinese Youth Athletic Association. And so I told you guys before, I'm a very avid basketball fan, basketball player. Been playing my whole life, well, majority of my life. And so I played very competitively with that organization, and they much at Raptors games, as you guys know, there's like, I don't know if you guys know this, maybe not. They have different cultural heritage nights, right? So there's like 2 Asian heritage nights a year, and maybe different cultural heritage nights throughout during home games, especially in Toronto where it's super multicultural. And so CCYA has always partnered with the MLSE and Raptors during those Asian heritage nights, and they'll make like a big event out of it, and they'll sell tons and tons of tickets to like the Asian community when like Jeremy Lin comes, or different Asian basketball players back in the day. And so I think in 2012, I think that was my first one. I don't know. Like some of my friends who lead that organization, they were looking for Asian anthem singers, right? They all knew I did church stuff, so they're like, Darrick, like, would you be up for auditioning? I'm like, okay, like, what does that look like? And they're like, well, you got to sing it, and we're going to refer you, but you got to still record the US and the Canadian and send it into the MLSE, and they're going to vet it, and if they say yes, then you can do it. And so I did. I sent it in. They said yes. And my first one, I think, was like 2012. They called me another day to fill in for somebody. So I think I did 2 in 2012, 2 in 2013, 1 in 2014. I think I did 2012, 2015, I did like 1 or 2 each year. And then it was fun. It was really fun. Really, really nerve-wracking almost every single time. But it was one of like the kind of like the coolest experience I've ever had. So.
Wow. You hear that, Chris? You better practice and audition if you want to sing the national anthem during a Raptors game, buddy. You'll get there, Chris. You'll
I
get
was, I
there.
was lucky, yeah, I was lucky to have a connection, right? A connection to it. I think you still can like send in auditions just on the fly. I don't know. I don't know if you can do that.
Oh,
Maybe they
really?
have like a place online. I'm not sure. Maybe I'm just, I could be completely lying here. Uh, but yeah, I'm very grateful for the opportunity and like to have like footage of that I can forever.
Do you write that in your resume, like right under your like worship pastor role at the very bottom? I sang the national anthem at the Raptors game during these
I
years.
I'll share a funny story before I go. I don't know if you guys
Mm,
know John Kim from worship leader John Kim
I
from
do.
Bridgewater. The
Yeah.
first time, like I've known him for quite a while now, but one of the first Vision X's he showed up in, he came to my worship leader workshop at Vision X, a breakout, and then and I forgot what he said something so. And he literally walks in the room and sits down with everybody. All the kids are there, and he's just like, it's um, like, aren't you the guy that sang the national anthem at the Raptors game? He said it as a joke.
Right.
He actually didn't know
Oh,
it.
he actually didn't know. Oh, wow.
No,
Okay.
he said it as a joke, and just like the thing that just came to his head. Oh yeah, I did. How'd you know that? He's like, wait, what? I was like, first of all, who asks such a specific thing? You know, when you don't even know the dude. And so it was so funny. I'm like, oh, I thought you knew that actually happened. He's like, oh crap, no, I didn't know you actually did that. Like that's super cool. And then we became friends.
Yeah, now you're growing him as a worship leader too, right?
Uh, he, I
He
mean,
was
growing his feet.
starstruck, man. You led him. That was your hook that got him.
So funny. Yeah, yeah,
All
man.
right. One final thing that we ask our guests to do, if you are comfortable with it, we always end our streams with a prayer. So would you be willing to pray for, just to end our stream today?
Absolutely not. No, I'm kidding.
All right.
I will do it.
All right. Thank you so much, Pastor
Okay.
Derek.
Yeah, let's pray together. God, thank you for this opportunity to share, to talk, to converse, to hear each other's stories. Lord, we know that when we reflect and we listen to one another, when we listen to each and every one of our stories, God, we are reminded of how you've been working, and that it is in our testimonies where we continually see your hand at work. And so I'm grateful that I got to share, some of my story, the Lord, and every single person that is listening, that's tuned in. God, you are indeed working your own story in their lives, and you have a plan and purpose for them, God. And anybody is in a place of hurt or pain or discouragement, Lord, would you bring comfort? Would you bring revelation? Would you bring peace to them? Remind them that you are there, and that your Holy Spirit is with them today. So God, we appreciate and thank you for the technology that we have to do this. We continue to look towards you, look to you, and seek your face in everything that we do. We pray all these things in Jesus' name.
Amen. Thank you so much once again, Pastor Derek. Viewers,
No
give
problem.
him a round of applause, and thank him for joining us today.
Yeah.
It was awesome. You gave so much insight, such detailed answers. Like I could have asked for a better interview for my first one. So thank you so much.
Amazing. Thanks, guys. I appreciate everybody watching. It was really nice to be here with all of you.
All right. Yeah. So you are free to go unless you want to stay around for whatever reason. But
Well,
yeah.
my wife is calming me down, so I got to get going.
All right. Perfect. Have yourself a great night, Pastor Derek, and we'll
Talk
see
to
you
you
next
guys
time.
later.
Peace out. Bye. All right, guys. So, that being said, we're going to switch over. Whoops, that's not what we want to see. So, thank you so much, everyone, for tuning in. That was awesome. Thank you so much for your participation. Thank you for the questions. Sorry, not answers. Questions that you've given to Pastor Derek as well. A big thing that I would like to ask you guys to do, of course, is to follow us if you can. Thank you to It's Yenny for following, and of course, thank you again to Tahoe for following as well. Thank you for joining the Cell community. We look forward to having you here and joining us for future streams and joining us on our Discord, as well as joining us for community games or tournaments. And there's a couple updates that I want to give. Our next guest has still yet to be decided. We will let you know as soon as possible once we know who our next guest will be. In addition, we are changing our stream time just a little bit. Mondays and Wednesdays are still going to be at 8 p.m., but Friday, our community game nights are going to be pushed back to 8:30. So we are going to be starting at 8:30. We'll start to try recruiting people a little bit earlier than that so that we are starting right on time on 8:30 to go. But that's essentially what's going to be happening with the change. This Friday, we are going to be playing some golf with your friends. So if you have the game, come tune in. It's going to be a crazy time. That game is absolutely nuts. So it's going to be an awesome time there. Tahoe, do you have Korean classes? I would love to do Korean classes. I do not do Korean classes here. But I mean, if you want us to, we can definitely write that idea down. I can't write Korean very well, but I can speak and read it just fine. So I could give some tidbits, or maybe we just grab a Korean teacher, and then maybe we'll do a stream like that, like a Korean stream, like a teaching stream or something like that. That'd be awesome. So yeah, if you have stream ideas like that, please let us know. We'll definitely write it down. We always take all our suggestions into consideration, and we do that. So thank you very much for the suggestion. We'll keep that in mind. You're Korean, but you can't do anything in Korean. That's okay. That's okay. We all start somewhere. All right. So, once again, thank you so much for tuning into our stream. Thank you so much for your views at home. Bless you all. You guys were so welcoming to Pastor Darrick, and I hope you took a lot out of what he shared today. Really good information and advice, and it's awesome to hear about his ministry. So go check him out, www.worshipproject.ca, for his website, and kind of look into the videos that he's created, and he definitely does workshops. Once COVID's over, I'm sure he'll start bringing his worship leader workshops and all that back. So it's going to be awesome. All right, so please go check him out. Give him the support. They have a Facebook page as well. I don't know. I'm sure they have an Instagram. So Worship Project, search them up. Give him the support, and yeah, that'll be it. So thank you so much once again for tuning in. This is Tommy, and I'll see you Wednesday 8 p.m. Peace out, everybody.